Diffusion, fact or thoughts. When we're looking at diffusion, we're trying to separate the idea that thoughts are factual. We try and separate this idea that the content within thoughts are factual. Because we go out and we rely on thoughts so often, there's a tendency for us to go out and adopt them, accept them with very little consideration, with very little thought, with very little awareness. And what we're trying to do with diffusion is in actual fact to look at a thought and firstly begin to separate ourselves from that, and in that process being able to make an assessment or a judgment as to, is this thought of value, of service? Is this important for me to take on, or is it something that's repetitive and really unhelpful? So I like to look at diffusion in a fact or a thought type of breakdown. And I do this with my clients as well, because we're not asking them to simply throw away thoughts or just reject them and say that no thoughts are factual and therefore I don't need to engage at all. We're saying these are thoughts. Some are going to be helpful, some are not. But it's what happens when I have these thoughts. How do I deal with these thoughts? How do I manage these thoughts? And there's two ways that we can do it. One is a tendency to struggle. One's a tendency to fight with them, to go out and challenge them. And the other one is a more gentle noticing type of approach. And that's what diffusion is. So if we break down the fact and the thought process, it'll look something like this. So over here we have fact versus thought. Now, fact versus thought, if we break that down and we look at it, traditionally we might go out and say that when there's a factual idea, like for example in common CBT, in that standardized CBT approach, with a fact, what we would generally do is we would challenge that thought, dispute the thought. We'd go out and somewhat fight it. And so that creates a struggle. We have a struggle with these thoughts and we're going backwards and forwards and we're trying to say, what's the truth? And that's the issue here, is that we're trying to find the truth and we're trying to find, right versus wrong, what's the truth and so on. And the truth is something that in ACT we're not interested in. We're more interested in what's of benefit, what's of service, what's of value rather than the truth. So it's a struggle trying to find the truth. So finding right versus wrong, or truth finding. And this is where the struggle happens, and we're trying to push and we're trying to shove, we're trying to figure this all out. On the other side, a thought is something that we simply notice. We're simply going out and in ACT, we're trying to notice thoughts. And at that point, we're not going out and challenging, we're not disputing, we're not fighting, we're not struggling, we're not finding the right versus the wrong or looking for truth. We're actually noticing, and from that place of noticing, we simply ask one question. And that one question is around benefit. Does it give me benefit? Is it workable? Is it useful? So we just take a thought and then we go out and ask this workable, beneficial type of analysis, rather than going out and fighting and struggling and this is right, this is wrong. We're asking, is this of benefit? Now, that's what we want to do, but the first step is to actually be able to notice, and that's where diffusion comes into its own. In diffusion, we're saying, if I can notice it, then I can go out and look at workability. So in the noticing part, That's the process, noticing the process of thought, noticing that I'm having a thought, and so on. So there's a few diffusion strategies or tools or processes, if you will, that I'd like to share with you. And the first one is looking at a commentary box. So we just want to go out and say, there's the commentary box. So that's the commentary box. It's going out and it's talking to me all the time. It's chatting. It certainly never stops, and it's just commenting. There's another one that I call the minister, and I usually say, thanks, minister. And I'll explain why I call this the minister. When I'm driving my car and there's someone in front of me, the Minister of Transport pops in, that's the mind, and says, there should be another lane here, or that person should be moving across, or I might talk about the lights are staying red for too long, or there's too much traffic, there should be different times when people are crossing over, or it'll talk about where there should be a roundabout, or where there should be traffic lights, or where there should be just a give way. It'll be talking about it all the time. That's the Minister of Transport. But if I walk into a hospital, then the mind becomes, as you guessed, the Minister of Health. So all of a sudden I can tell you about the staffing levels and how they should be, and how many doctors we should have, and where are the nurses, and how should we be greeted, and there should be more resources within the hospital. And then if I watch the television and there's some discussion around say immigration and those sorts of things coming into a country, then the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Immigration comes up as well. So all of a sudden that minister starts to tell me about how we should conduct our affairs, and so on and so forth. And we see this with lots of people when they're watching the television. They start to get caught up. They start to go into the fact of whether this is right or wrong. They provide these opinions rather than noticing it and asking, is this of benefit to me or not? So the minister shows up a lot. That's one of my favourites. Another one that's very useful is saying, I am having the thought that. So an example might be, someone might be looking to get themselves a job. They're looking to go to a interview, and the mind says to them, I'm not going to get the job anyway. Now, I'm not going to get the job anyway. If we hold it as a fact, we tend to just adopt it, and somewhat consumes us, and there's a tendency, therefore, not to go to the interview, or not even to go out and apply. I'm having the thought that they won't employ me is a very different situation. It's a thought that they won't employ me. It's not a fact. And in actual fact, we just notice it. Is that beneficial? Is it workable? We get to decide for ourselves. There's mind tweet, which is basically the mind going out and tweeting, making a comment, saying something to me, and I just notice, hey, that's a mind tweet. So I'm having the thought that, or I'm having a mind tweet. It's quite useful, and I think it's very playful as well. I've heard that thought before. It's helpful just to notice that these thoughts are coming all the time. It's a stream of thought. So I've heard it before. I've listened to it many, many different times. And so through noticing it, has it been of benefit previously? I get to decide, and I decide, how do I want to hold it? The point of diffusion is not to get rid of the thoughts, not to push those thoughts away, but simply to allow them to appear, to sit there, and we hold it lightly and allow them to pass in their own time. So there's 5 different examples of what you can go out and use. Remember, we're moving from fact to thought, rather than going out and trying to find the right, the wrong, the truth, because these are ultimately opinions, and we're asking, is it a beneficial thought or not? So work with that. remember that the premise around diffusion is about seeing the process of thought, not fighting thought. And I'm sure you'll be able to diffuse and support your clients in doing so quite easily with some of these. Take care.